So, welcome again, everybody, and we are just going to start with our crowdsourced news update. So if anybody has anything they'd like to share or a reflection on this year, we would really love to hear from you. I think, Bob, you said you had something to share.
It's a sort of generalish thing. Let's have people talking about the various bits and pieces from where you are. There must be something.
Tim, go for it.
I bring you news of the second annual Leicester Cycling Awards. So we're a local independent bike shop. Northside Bikes have took it upon themselves to organise some cycling awards, and the categories include Best New Rider Adults and Junior, Best Educational Establishment supporting cycling, Best Commuter Champion, Best Cycling Workplace, Best Cycling Destination. These are going to be a mixture of awards decided by a panel of experts. I might be on that panel, and a public vote to get the excitement really building through January, February and March. So, oh, and coolest bike. I'm going for coolest bike. So there you go. Bit of news from Leicester.
That sounds really nice. Are you going to have a celebration event then for your...
Absolutely enormous. Yes. Thousands of people are expected to converge on the city to, we might, yes, we're doing a do. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to hearing who's won them. Beth, have you got something to share?
Sorry, I don't use Zoom very often and I can't find the mute button. A couple of small things down in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. In the new year, we have opening our first town centre secure bike parking facility, which we're doing with Spoke Safe. We are also in February, after February half term, doing 2 new school streets to add to the 4 that we've already got. And not that I can claim any credit for this whatsoever, but we had a really nice Kidical Mass event last weekend, using some new infrastructure that was installed this year. So despite the absolute biting cold, we had a turn of about 75 or 80 people, and it was really good.
That all sounds really positive. I think that's when you realise how good having new infrastructure is when you can do winter rides and it feels possible and less not entirely stressful and with cold weather. So,
yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I saw the photographs of that. It looked really good.
Oh, yeah.
Ruth, you got something?
Yes. Hounslow Cycling Campaign won the LCC award for best working with officers and councillors and showing the way to get things done, which I thought was really rather nice because we have worked terribly hard, all of us. So that was nice.
Congratulations, that's great news. And Dave.
Oh yeah, okay. Couple of things. One, for my sins, I have a reunion for Christmas lunch with all the engineers who used to work for British Rail Scottish region 30 years ago, and one of them has been involved with tram routes and roads, and the roads people came up with the idea of creating a loading bay for HGVs which was 2.55 meters wide, and he pointed out that a lot of mirrors on trams and trucks would be missing if they put it there, because HGVs and buses tend to be about 3 meters wide, and you need a lane width of at least 3.25 meters to move around at 20 to 30 miles an hour. Quite significantly, all of the crash sites at the Holborn Crossroads have had lanes approaching those crash sites 3 meters wide or less. So it's no surprise that HGVs kept bashing into cyclists because there's just not enough room to maneuver. And it's an interesting sort of signatory of crash sites. How many have substandard lane widths for manoeuvring and substandard corner radii for turning, which introduced the crashes. So that's my little thing for the day, I think. That was probably another thing. Oh, cycle parking. Yes, I am aware. Cycleworks is Peter, who worked in Seattle and introduced the bike lockers. And so he's also been producing Sheffield stands on rails that can be ported about and dropped on site. So that cycle works for you. There are much better ways of storing bikes, keeping them upright and so forth, but nobody in the UK uses them. You'll see them all over Europe, but not in the UK.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, we've had quite a bit on cycle parking this year. No doubt it's something that we'll come back to next year. So, Rachel.
Thank you. That was my question, because we are installing a new cycle parking facility at our very small local station. Hooray! So that's quite exciting for Leicestershire, because we don't do an awful lot. So yeah, so we're looking at that, and Cycleworks is one of the contenders. That's why I was asking the question. I just want to make sure we're getting the right thing at the station. It's going to be lockers and potentially Sheffield stands with a cover.
Great, that sounds good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Mark?
Well, yes, on that note, we're doing a very large piece of work for West Yorkshire Combined Authority. This isn't secret, I think we tweeted about it, which is analysing all the different providers of cycle parking. It's residential cycle parking. I disagree with Dave. I think we actually do on-street stuff quite well here. The Dutch are moving towards Sheffield racks now, because they can't be stolen and anything else. Basically, Sheffield racks or lockers or two-tier inside, and that's it. Everything else is just glorified artistic rubbish, in my opinion. But our study will show this in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It will be published by West Yorkshire at, well, I'm assuming they're the client, they can do what they like with it, but I'm assuming they will publish it and it will be available. We've had other authorities saying, can they look at it before it's published? And that's obviously up to our client to say what we tell them or what we suggest to them.
Well, that would be great. You have to let us know if it's published.
Kit Allwinter, who occasionally was on here, used to be at Greater Manchester. So some of you may know him. He's the client now. So if you want to ask him privately, he might tell you things.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, and I'm with you on the Sheffield stands. Claire.
Hiya, yeah, just a few bits and pieces from Manchester Way. We've had a Cargaroo scheme running for the last year, Cargaroo bikes for hire in a selection of locations in South Manchester, and that's the scheme's coming to an end, and they're not able to extend it because apparently it's not proved cost effective. So there's been sort of the usual damage, but also I just don't think the use has justified it. A lot of kind of leisure use, but not use through the week. So that's quite interesting and a bit of a shame. Other Manchester news, the council have been working on what's called the Manchester Active Travel Investment Plan. I think that strategy and investment plan, MATSIP, been working on it for a few months, which ultimately that is to draw up a pipeline of schemes that will form a network in the city, which doesn't sound like progress, but ultimately the schemes that they've put forward in the past, they haven't really had any kind of rhyme or reason behind them. We've kind of, as campaigners, sort of scratched our heads and gone, why did they propose that one? So bringing more sort of robustness into planning schemes, and they're also just starting a walking study, which should end up with 8 to 10 walking schemes prioritised for investment. And on that note, I thought I'd just ask if anyone knows what is happening with Active Travel Fund 4, because those schemes that I mentioned, that's what they'd be aiming for. We hadn't heard any news from that for a while, and I think they were due to put the criteria out some time ago, and I'm not sure they're out yet. And then just lastly, it's a bit of a sort of a question into the group, was we've got a big cycle scheme going through Manchester where I live, and it's about 2/3 built, and the final third is going in, and it's the bit that goes through the kind of high street where all the shops are. I attended the local traders meeting a couple of weeks ago, where they had a sort of bespoke session with the project scheme, and just, you know, the traditional worries around parking and deliveries came up quite vociferously from a small number of traders. Some of them were supportive, but I just wonder if anyone, I just feel like this is a whole area that, you know, there's so much evidence about how the traders' fears are not justified when it comes to, oh my God, people won't be able to park, a business is going to fall out of my business. And secondly, the deliveries and the fact that a lot of their objections were about, oh, delivery companies that, you know, won't go and park in a delivery bay. They'll either not deliver or like park in the middle of the road and stop the traffic. And it just seemed like some really random complaints. So that was a question to the group. Does anyone know of any good sources of evidence around business, apart from the Sustrans report that was done about 10 years ago? And this thing around deliveries, and do people know of any schemes around like encouraging delivery companies to sort of park and deliver well? And should this be something that we campaign for, you know, a sort of national code of practice around good deliveries? That's me.
Does anybody have any thoughts about those questions? I think while you're thinking, I think you must have pedestrianised areas though that already have, because we had similar issues around a street here, questions about deliveries, and one of the, you know, that we have you know, a city centre, the main street is pedestrianised and they have to have delivery times, so it's a sort of non-argument in many ways. But yeah, I mean, there must be different rules around deliveries in different parts of the city and in pedestrian areas anyway, I would guess. Adam, you got something to
say? The local authority active travel toolkit does have a economic section going into that, so that might be quite useful because that's a government document sort of set. The other interesting thing I'd probably reach out to you afterwards about the kind of cargo bikes, because that seems to be a theme that lots of places are getting into now, is these kind of mobility hubs, and throw some cargo bikes into them. If they're not really working, and that needs to probably be thrown out. Mark Strong denies he doesn't know what's going on with Active Travel Fund 4, but you know, he on Twitter at least. But I did try and get. He knows everything, so I don't know why he didn't tell me. But yeah, so I really don't.
I just know where to look.
Don't lie. No, but yeah, so I think that's the only bit I know that's official in terms of the economic case. Usually, though, with delivery companies, what actually happens is, and just purely experience in Bath, is, you know, if they did it, there's a street called Stall Street where they basically shut after, I think it's, you have to, closure is 10 a.m. and then it opens again at 6 p.m. And basically the delivery companies kind of manage around it because they have no choice. They're in successful economic areas. It becomes very attractive to shop there and people want to buy goods there. So eventually they work their way around it.
Yeah, I do think there is something around though, like, I mean, there's a wider economic case and what's worked elsewhere, but for local traders, often those really, really local examples, I think, are really good. How it might work in a different place that you can.
The other thing that's quite interesting about when the local traders oppose a lot of this stuff, you do find a lot of them are using the area as a parking space, and there are some personal sort of things that go on there. It's quite interesting. There's one where they're looking at residence parking zones about and putting them in, and a lot of the traders oppose them. But they never asked the question. The one that's always asked is, well, how did your customers get to your shop? How did they arrive? They don't ever ask that, and I think that's a critical question. And there have been studies on that, which I think have shown that most traders massively overestimate how many of their customers are actually arriving by car. It is in the 20% or thereabouts, depending on the situation, but they'll be up there at 50-60%. They're thinking that most of their customers are arriving by car, and it's not the case. So that question has to be asked of those traders. Have you done the survey? Have you found out how your customers are arriving?
Thanks, Adam. We'll take Beth, and then Guy, I think, had a hand up in the chat.
Oh, it was just about the Active Travel Fund. Although when you said Guy, it's not Guy Bowlby, is it, by any chance? Because he will know more than I do. No, different Guy. Okay, I can see you now. It was just the latest I've heard from Active Travel England as of Monday this week was that on the Capability and Ambition Fund, which is revenue funds that councils have already bid for, Active Travel England are expecting approval to release those funds later this week, but I don't think we'll actually hear anything until after Christmas now. With regards to Active Travel Fund 4, they were still awaiting like a review with ministers following the autumn statement. And so again, they're not expecting to launch until the new year now. But they have been running some like briefing sessions for local authorities, sort of giving a heads up about what will be expected for those bids. Is quite onerous, so it's quite a lot of work for officers to do for those, but it does, from the sense I got from Active Travel England, was that they're quite positive about the funding that's going to be available, and that it is going to happen. It's just taking a while to actually be confirmed. The only downer was that it looks as though budgets are going to be secured as per previously kind of agreed by ministers, which sounds great, but then when you take into account inflation, that's actually not so great, because it's actually worth less than it was when we first heard about it, you know, a year ago or whatever. So yeah, hopefully soon.
Thanks, Beth. That's really, really useful to know. Everything has just taken so much longer than I think everybody would want, but I think there's probably very good reasons for that in the background. Guy, did you want to come in?
Oh, hello. Yes. I've been lurking in this group for a while, but haven't had a chance to speak yet. But and I know a handful of people in the group. And just a bit of background about me: I was formerly Pedal Me, and I now work for a multimodal low carbon emission logistic business called Zero E. And I don't know if this is relevant. It's about school streets, which I guess is linked to active travel. I just moved from London to Brighton in early September, and delighted to find that my school is getting a school street. I think it's about the 6th or 7th in Brighton, and I made it my business to try and find out who the liaison was between the council and the school, as far as linking it to kind of broader education programs, and to find out the actual council officers involved in its design and implementation. I found out that there are no plans to use either physical barriers or ANPR, and I'm told that is because there are only, is it 3 cities in the UK where ANPR, for the purposes of enforcement and things like school streets, is permitted? And I certainly know London and Birmingham were mentioned. I am very skeptical about the likely success of this scheme without some sort of proper enforcement. And I've spoken to my local ward councillor, who seems to think that a little bit of sort of light touch policing and then council officers in high vises, you know, sort of for a few weeks each, will be enough to do it. I think he's being remarkably optimistic. I just wondered if anyone can shed any light on schemes that have been successful with a lack of enforcement, or shed any light on what the ANPR issue is, and if there is anything that we as citizens can do to bring political pressure on to bear on the DfT to make a decision.
Yeah, those are all really good questions, and yeah, thanks for kind of coming and raising that. I think I'm going to bring in Mike Cookson here, because I know that he can talk about a school street which is run on very similar terms here, which has been in for how long now in Newcastle?
Several months now.
Yeah.
So we've got a school street trial underway in Newcastle, in the ward that I represent, and fundamentally the success is solely based around the quality of the engagement that Sustrans did. The the officer from Sustrans spent a lot of time in the school, made a huge sort of push. I know she's spoken on this forum before, and came across very eloquently and well. I don't think she'd mind. You know, she knows every parent and every child in that school. She's a fantastic job on the engagement. You know, we still see really good levels of compliance. There are a number of people who are, you know, who are ignoring the signs, but it is quite few. The streetscape is very different at morning and evening and pick-up times. Residents are quite happy. We are collecting data. We are pushing for the moving violation powers, and I believe there's a delegated decision coming forwards in the new year to apply to the DFT for those. But it's all about getting people on board. If you can get the staff, the students, the parents on board, you know, it really can make a difference. And I think everybody really, there was a good proportion of people had a vested interest in it working, and I think that worked really well. You know, but we are mindful of that. We would like to have the option to have ANPR if we needed it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the case that, I mean, it's great to see them popping up. If they disappear and they're kind of just a failure, then that's not great. The next step has got to be, if they're not working, you know, and really even if they are working, they need some kind of enforcement. So it's the next thing to lobby for.
Yeah.
So just
could I just say one more thing quickly?
Yeah.
Sorry. So not strictly speaking exactly active travel, but my company is doing a Cedars crowdfunder, and so while that's not kind of active travel, we are obviously massive supporters of cycle infrastructure and active travel infrastructure more generally. So if it's okay with you, I will pop a link in the chat, if I may.
Yes, go for it. Thanks.
Super, thank you.
Thanks, Guy. So I've got Dave and Bob and Simon. Dave and Simon, do you want to come in first, and then we'll bring Bob in, and then we must get on to our first speaker. Dave.
Okay, fine. I'm just catching up on some of the delivery stuff. We've got two mainstream deliveries, Zedify and Urbit, who are sponsored by the B Corporation, and they have their base load in contracts for city centre delivery postcodes. I think Urbit are doing Yodel largely, badly as well, and because I'm reporting them. And Zedify are doing, I've got the contract with FedEx. I think they've got some in livery trikes as well with FedEx, but they're using trikes, handovers, so that they spread the load, and regular rounds. So it's a good idea to get the base load of the before 10 o'clock stuff, which you can deliver very, very successfully. That works well. Plus, of course, city centre deliveries. Andrea Caselotti ran a Pudo at 7 Dials, I think about 10 years ago, where they delivered everything to all the businesses in the Covent Garden area, but by bike, and it worked perfectly well using cargo bikes, decanted from larger vehicles at the pickup drop-off. And Transport for London actually has a network of this sort of dispersal points, so that large HGVs don't come into the city centre to deliver small loads. And you know, 1994, which is what, nearly 30 years ago, the bicycle blueprint for New York City identified that most of the deliveries in a city centre weigh under 30 kilos, which is the sort of load you can carry around on a cargo bike. So why are we using trucks and vans?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and really it has to be the future, doesn't it? So it's how do we get there? Simon, I bring you in, and then we'll have Bob, and then we'll move on to Bryn.
Yeah, I was just going to say, fair amount of stuff in the chat about people saying ANPR cameras, councils are saying they're too expensive. And the simple truth is, for school streets, that might be arguably true if you've got a really quiet school street and you're trying to put a camera on it. But pretty much every ANPR camera that we've seen going anywhere has immediately racked up like huge amounts of fines in the first couple of months. So you have like 2 weeks normally grace period, you get letters, or you even get a month grace period, you get letters if you drive through. Then after that you start getting fines. So those first few months the fines are huge. Then everyone kind of slowly works out and realizes they're getting fined, stops driving through. But even after years, you'll still see a low level of non-compliance, which will keep paying for the cameras. So in actual fact, certainly in London, we're seeing a situation where we're seeing tabloids and newspapers and media say, look, it's a stealth tax on motorists. How dare they levy this millions of pounds they're getting from cameras, etc. So that tells you everything you need to know about like how profitable these cameras are at generating revenue, etc. So the idea that the ANPR cameras are too expensive to put in strikes me as the kind of weak excuse you get from councils who don't want to do this. It's not about revenue for them, it's about political issues or whatever that's holding up delivery. But if a council says we can't afford to put in an ANPR camera because it costs too much, then they just don't understand what these things do, in my view.
Thanks, Simon. Newcastle did have an ANPR camera, well, does have one for a bus lane, and has had to hand back quite substantial amounts of the fine, so they're not surprisingly a little bit risk averse. But yeah, I mean, all of these things when they're new, they can be challenging, can't they? And it's sort of overcoming different fears around them, and I think, as somebody, was it Claire, I think, has pointed out in the chat, that local politicians don't want that flack about, you know, this is just a money raising exercise. So yeah, it's I suspect over time though it will become kind of normalized and more authorities will use them. All right, over to you, Bob, and then we will move on to
okay, thanks. I'll do a neat segue by saying that just a couple of conferences to look out for next year. The Oxford one will be about Oxford cycling and walking, and that should be a really key point. Also, there's another Landor one on school streets in February in Lambeth. So, you know, you can get together with people and work through all that stuff there. So my thought for the year, on a couple of occasions, I've sort of debated with Simon and others here about how you've got a sort of general tendency, which I'm in favour of when you're campaigning, how to be successful campaigning, how to discuss issues with people, how to allay their legitimate fears about LTNs, how to avoid the antis when they're plainly not going to take part in any real discussion. And, you know, I'm in favour of that, all those kind of like hints on how to be an effective campaigner. And that's good. And that's also a kind of upbeat and positive thing, and you can feed off that. However, I am also, as you know, I am constantly, because no doubt I've spent too many years doing sociology in university, I spend a lot of time being interested in ideology and belief systems and the complexities of things that all of us tend to take for granted without questioning. And the sort of things that I think do sometimes need to be talked about come under the sort of rather inadequate heading of culture wars. And I think most of us don't want to get into culture wars, because when it comes to cars, motorists just sort of freak out and yell at you and call you loony and so on. But what at this time of the year, what I'm kind of getting into is, how will that come up? When do we call people out? And when do we, whatever we're doing in terms of our actual kind of day-to-day activities, when do we sort of stand back and look at ourselves and say, what is actually going on here? How is this going to pan out? And I have to say that when I raised this before, and Lucy Curtis, who's here today, said, oh, this reminds me of when I did consciousness raising when I was a feminist 50 years ago. I was very gratified by that, I must say. So those kind of thoughts about what's going on in the background are ones that will are sort of like at the top of my mind now. A couple of years after gear change, we're going through what seem to be very turbulent times, certainly for the next couple of years. And these sort of things are kind of stirring around my head. I may be doing quite a long piece on the RDRF website. And anyway, to end on a sort of fairly upbeat note, the RDRF president, Jenny Jones, has got a private members bill going through, which will go to the House of Commons, maybe talked out, a sort of Ella's law about air quality, which, you know, watch this space. So overall, there is lots of positive stuff happening, lots of upbeat stuff, but I'm still kind of lurking around in the background thinking about what is actually going on behind all this. Have a happy new year.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and let's see what next year brings. But I think it has been a bit of a strange year, hasn't it? This year, sort of in between, feels sort of an in between times. And moving on, we're really pleased to have Bryn Book here to talk this evening. So we're going to have a short talk from Bryn and some Q&A, and then to finish off with, we've also got Mark Philpotts back, aka Ranty Highwayman, with an infrastructure slot again. So we'll hand over to Bryn first, and some of you might follow Bryn. I'm sure many of you do on Twitter. ShowMeASign Bryn, which and I'm a big fan of your Twitter account. So do you want to see if you can share your screen, Bryn, and we'll
let's give it a go.
And I'll let you properly introduce yourself.
All right, excellent, thank you. Right then, is that visible for people?
Yeah, great. Do you want to try doing slideshare?
Yeah, excellent. Let's run that then. Right then, so as Sally's just pointed out, I'm obviously Bryn Book, so I was going to do a quick introduction anyway. So I've 13 years industry experience. I don't call myself an expert. I never use the word expert because there's always something you can learn. So my current role is I'm a senior design technician with responsibility for road safety and active travel. I do a bit of consultancy from that as well with my employers. I'm currently leading on concept designs for some fairly major LC WIP schemes. If you know what LC WIP is, if that's good. If you don't, it's basically big active travel projects by the government. You're practically going to be coming up against Active Travel England if you want to be getting LC WIP money. So that's a good scheme to be involved with. And I've been interested in general roads and transport stuff since I was about 3 or 4 years old, hence the picture, which was World Book Day in 1993. I went as the highway code and won second place. Didn't win first because somebody did a very good Beatrix Potter impression instead. So that's that. So I'll move on quickly because I know we've not got lots of time for this and I've got a few slides to run through. So I'm just going to point out, I was asked to do about infrastructure and the law, and I think campaigners always worry a bit that sometimes things can't happen because you get the sort of legalese answers from professionals, which, as alluded to earlier, when councils don't want to do something, they hide behind the lawyers. So we've only really got two duties as highway designers, and they're covered under the Highways Act 1980 and the Traffic Management Act 2004, and that's to maintain the highway and to make sure that traffic moves freely and quickly. Now, some councils seem to think that traffic only means cars, others seem to understand that traffic means anybody who has a legal right to use the highway, which does mean that you can actually disbenefit other modes to favour modes you want to prioritise, hence why we're allowed to do bus lanes and cycle lanes. So the good news is that most active travel schemes that are put in place already, there are already powers to do that. You don't need any specific acts of parliament. You don't need to run through hoops to get them done. So, for example, a school street, that is pretty much just a prohibition of driving order with a new style traffic sign. There's nothing about that can't be done. So if anybody says, oh, we can't do school streets because they're too difficult, they're lying, quite honestly. There is no reason why they can't deliver that. It's just done under the Road Traffic Regulation Act. Obviously, there's some slightly different variations depending on whether you're in Scotland or London, but the general principle is the powers already exist. Again, the very contentious one is the low traffic neighbourhood. Same powers again, it's just a prohibition of driving, or if you want to really go for it, you can actually stop up the highway completely and remove that right of way for motor vehicles entirely and just dedicate a footpath or whatever. I think prohibition of driving orders are easier to do because you can revoke them and move them if you need to, whereas if you stop the highway up, it's gone. and it's a very permanent change. You don't intend to stop it up if you're building a new housing development or whatever. Again, these powers exist, so when people turn up and smash up a plan to saying you have no legal authority to block the road, complete drivel. There is no reason why you can't do it. It's all perfectly legitimate. So again, you're not acting out on a limb if you say, why can't we close a road off? You have powers, they exist. So any council that says you can't do that, any bad faith actor in particularly the one groups that seem to exist on Twitter, they have very little on. The only thing they can argue against is if you haven't followed the consultation processes or the correct legal procedures for implementing these. But the actual act of blocking a road, there is nothing in there that says you can't do that. So you do this with two types of traffic regulation order. You've got permanent and experimental. We don't tend to use temporary or special event clauses for proper active travel schemes, but special event clauses are good if you want to have a car-free Sunday or a play street or any other similar sort of event where you wouldn't want to close the road on a permanent basis, but you need a power to stick some cones out and then whatever you need to do. So I've just been a bit of a definition here of a permanent order. So this is what you would usually do. That's a permanent order. You go through a process, you put the signs, the lines, whatever physical features, and then that makes the traffic signs and all the associated street furniture enforceable, excuse me, under Section 36 of the Road Traffic Act 1988. But you don't necessarily need a TRO for a sign to be covered by Section 36. So for example, a bus stop clearway, you don't need a TRO for. In London, you don't need a TRO for school clearways, but there was a bit of a cock-up outside of London, so you still do need a TRO. But there's certain things you don't need a TRO for, but it makes the sign enforcement. It's just worth checking what's what. I think mandatory cycle lanes are a bit of a grey area as well with that at the moment, because the intention was you didn't need a TRO to install a mandatory cycle lane, and then somebody pointed out, what about parking? And then it all kind of fell to the panic behind the lawyers kind of thing. So I don't think that's been fully resolved yet, which is why you still see double yellow lines being painted in strange places along cycle routes. Obviously, an experimental order, this is a good way to refer to, I think, what Chris Boardman once said as try before you buy. So you put the experimental, it's going to be an experimental TRO in first. It can only last for 18 months, but you do the first 6 months as a live trial / consultation period. So you put the scheme in and then people can comment on how effective or not effective. So you've got to monitor it and ensure you keep an eye on it. This is probably the best way to get things in place, I think, because if you do it through the permanent route, you've got to consult before you start doing anything, and you're just going to get into a never-ending cycle of consultations, and you'll get death by 1,000 cuts, and eventually you'll end up with a scheme that's completely suboptimal and not what you're trying to deliver. So I think the experimental process is probably the best way to do this. And then obviously you just got to remember, at the end of the 18 months, you've either got to make the whole scheme permanent or you've got to scrap it and take it out. There's no way to just keep renewing an experimental order. It's got to be done one way or the other at the end. I think, as you said there, so again, consultations being treated as referendums, that's another council problem at the moment that I've come across, especially others have come across, and I think others on this very group have used that saying that, consultations are not referendums. It's merely we want an opinion on a scheme. It is not a yes or a no. It is not a legally binding agreement. If 98% of residents say they don't want the scheme, as a council, you still have the right to implement that scheme. You're going to have a very difficult time doing it, but you are within your rights to do it. There is nothing that says a public backlash means you cannot implement a TRO. So if it's a contentious scheme that's got a public good that people don't want to accept, it can still be done. There is nothing in there that says, so when you get all this, they're subverting democracy, they're abusing the will of the people, it's all nonsense. If you have followed the correct process, the scheme is legitimate, the scheme can remain. They can try and take it for a High Court judgment if they want, but as long as the authority has followed the procedures for implementing the TRO, they'll be covered. And so one of the phrases used in fact, in the BPA guidance on consultation, it actually says, try and win hearts and minds before you go in with a scheme, because it'll make life a lot easier down the line. But Anybody outside of the directly affected area, they're just a generic comment. It does not matter what their opinion is. So if you wanted to take a lane out on, say, a major road into a city, and you get lots of people who drive into that city but don't live in the city saying, well, that's going to make my trip to work worse. Thank you, your comment is noted. That is literally all you have to do. They don't get special weight because they use a road. You have to, it's just things that people try to throw in to say that what we're doing is illegitimate in the active travel world. So are new types of junctions lawful? Because we hear a lot of people saying things like Cyclops junctions are, you can't build them because it's not in the guidance. Well, they're not in the guidance, but every component of a Cyclops junction is in the TSIGD or has a special authorization already for it. So low level signals, they're covered. Elephant's feet markings, they're covered. And cycle tracks have already been covered for decades anyway. So you can build a Cyclops, you can build a Dutch style intersection, you can build whatever you want, provided you comply with the TSIGD. There is no correct answer in what's the best junction type for a given situation. I'm sure you'll probably seen Ranty Highwayman's arguments about this, where he says, like, you use what's right for the junction. Sometimes it's the innie, sometimes it's the outie. As long as it's a safe design, it doesn't matter. No one can turn around and say, well, you can't do that. What is a problem, though, because the law is still a bit of a problem when it obstructs us ourselves. For example, like early start cycle signals still tend to need an DFT approval. You can't just put the little green signal on and say cyclists can move ahead before everybody else. You'll need a DFT approval for that in a lot of situations. The picture that's shown there, I can confirm does not have a DFT approval because the signals engineer kind of snuck it in because it was installed on a bus and cycle lane where the only way to trigger a green signal was to have a transponder on the bus. So he went and put the permanent green in so that cyclists could legally cross that stop line. It's not got a DFT approval though, but without that, if you cycled into that bus lane, you legally would be trapped there for the rest of your life until a bus came along and triggered the signal, whichever is the quicker, because it's Blackburn. It's not a safe place to cycle generally. I know, I do it a lot. Mini zebras are these are a particularly contentious issue at the moment, especially where protected junctions are being provided, like the Cyclops schemes in Greater Manchester. The TSIGD is obviously now stripped down the requirements, so on a cycle track you can just provide a very quick set of stripes and tactile paving, whereas the Oxford Road example as pictured there, that has got complete overkill. That zebra crossing has got more warnings of it than the ones on heavily trafficked A roads do. So I'm not sure what the risk profile is there, but it seems to be back to front that a cyclist doing 8 miles per hour is more of a threat than a car doing potentially 40 miles an hour. But that's just something to bear in mind as well, that there's nothing to stop you having mini zebras on or shared spaces even. There's a moratorium on big shared spaces, but having uncontrolled crossing across a cycle track is no different to an uncontrolled crossing across a side road. That is not a reason to prevent an active travel scheme being built. And obviously, I would never be a presentation by me unless it mentioned traffic signs. This is what sinks most schemes. I think I just mentioned in the chat earlier. If you get the signs wrong, you can have the best design in the world, but if the signs don't comply with the regulations and you miss out something, you're going to struggle to enforce it. So anyone who's designing schemes needs to make sure they've got the signs and lines right early on. Positioning of signs, because the last thing you want to do is a situation where you see a really wonderful new cycle track and then somebody goes and plonks the mandatory signage for the cycle track in the cycle track, making it unusable. I've seen that happen a few times, so just be wary of that. So for example, again, you can have a situation where there's too many signs, like the set of traffic lights there on the left, which is a mandatory instruction to travel both left and right. I'm not sure how you're supposed to comply with that. And then you may have seen the one on the right, which is becoming the biggest meme in the north right now, the cycle roundabout on Trafford Road, which hasn't got any signs, so there's no indication of how you're supposed to use it. Is that a roundabout, or can you circle around it in both directions? Can you go straight across the middle? There is absolutely no indication, so you can have either too many signs or too few signs. There's a balance that needs to be struck, and you've got to communicate effectively to the user what you want them to do. And I'm not 100% sure that cycle roundabout does that, but I know that's a very contentious thing at the moment. There's a few people argued about that one. Finally, to wrap up then, because I think I've used my 10 minutes nearly. The big problem remains is enforcement. That picture that I've taken there, that was me. We had a roadworks closure. I was stood there filming that driver, and he just went straight past. Now I was in full official council gear with traffic management operatives, and even the police turned up the day after, and people were still heading through that road closure. They actually would move the barriers themselves and drive through it. So the problem is with enforcement is the police don't have enough resources. They're not going to turn up to deal with traffic problems half the time. Councils currently don't have enough power, although I know the current move to civil enforcement of moving traffic offences is underway. So that's going to change hopefully in 2023, 2024. And then the public, well, this is the one I always worry about. Now, I always think it's great when people want to do school streets, but you don't have many protections. And if somebody starts getting aggressive or violent towards you, what are you meant to do in that situation? And I do have a genuine fear that someday someone's going to get seriously hurt because all they're doing is enforcing a school street, and somebody decides that that's the worst thing in the world and how dare you. So I think we need to perhaps try to not push for more public enforcement, because I think you'll just end up with battles on the streets where you've got people who don't want to play the game. And really, if we're going to enforce these things, as others have said, ANPR is an option. If the road is set to have a TRO to close it, you can put, someone comes out and puts a barrier across that, for example, outside the AO Arena in Manchester now, they have massive steel barriers for whenever they kick out after events following the obviously the sad events in 2017. So now they sort of have a sterile area to try and avoid any vehicle incursions into the crowds when they're tipping out. So you can block roads for these reasons. So it is just a case of trying to get the right tool for the job, and hopefully people campaign and keep putting people's feet against the fire. And I will certainly say, as an industry insider, we need people to put our feet against the fire, because there's a lot of complacency and a lot of arrogance that we say, well, what's your problem? We're going to do it our way. And it's not necessarily what people need or want. So I'm all for it. I think campaigning is a good thing. I think it's a very vital part of the process of highway design. And hopefully that will help with the enforcement and the legal side. So I'm going to wrap that one up now, because I think that is my last slide. Oh, yeah. So I say, yeah. So that's my closing comment. I know it's a bit of a Jerry Springer there, my final thought. So we can have all the laws we want, but the best outcome is an equitable, self-enforcing design backed by local support. And that's where you guys come in, because that's how we know. If we know we've got local support, we know we can do it. So I will pass that over to everybody else, and thank you for listening, and thanks for having me yet again. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryn. That was just great. And really, when we were just discussing this, it's really kind of what we really hope that you would do for us. While people are having a think about questions, I've got a question for you, which I have asked here in the past, and it sort of relates to the school streets, but also we have historic place streets in Newcastle, and I know they exist elsewhere in the country. And one of the issues with them always was enforcement, and for very much the same reasons as the school streets that only work with signs, that people just ignore them. And we also have here outside St James's Park, the football ground, we have a regular road closure when there's a match, and what they have is big gates that they swing across. And I suppose my question is around, even with camera enforcement, that very local area, sometimes right outside the gate of a school, you might want even more. You don't want anyone driving through. It might be. And I guess, is there something, do those signs, those kind of the signage for school streets or the play streets, because I think it's the same thing, isn't it? Do they allow you to use a barrier, or do you need something else to use a barrier for the time that they apply for?
No, my understanding is you can use a barrier, because a lot of pedestrianised streets, for example, they'll have a raise and lower automatic bollard. You're allowed to enforce that restriction how you see fit, as long as the emergency access and the exemptions are still possible. So, for example, if an ambulance needs to get through, as long as that can get through, which with an obviously rising bollard, they tend to have a fob, or with a manual bollard, I suspect, like the barriers outside St James's Park, there'll be a a marshal, presumably, that can just come and open it. So that would cover it. As far as I can see in law, that would be fine. The danger is that somebody comes and vandalizes the equipment when it's not being used. So you end up with a potential arms race. And it just, because we had that in Blackburn with the automatic bollards, when somebody worked out that you could just park your vehicle on top of it and it would never rise because the sensor is that was after the ones in Manchester famously kebabbed a few cars when the people were tailgating the metro shuttle buses, as was. So they had to come and put detector loops to prevent that from happening. But yeah, there's nothing that says you can't do that. It's just a case of what's the most proportionate, and obviously how many resources the authority has to throw at it. But yeah, on paper, yeah, there's nothing to stop you.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm going to pass over to other questions. So I think Ruth, you had your hand up first, and then we'll take Claire and Dave.
Thanks. Awesome, Bryn. Thank you very much. Two things for you. Last time you spoke, I think we did talk about whether government, DFT, or whoever it is, who I can't remember, will revise signage because we now have more cycling. So a lot of the old stuff, I've got two questions for you answer. So a lot of the old stuff that we've got relates to a pre-cycling kind of time when we didn't have cycle lanes, etc., etc., etc. And the other, which I just cannot understand, why are traffic lights in this country still new traffic lights are being put in which are not reactive instantly to when someone wants to cross. And I understand that on a big main busy road, but on, I was able through living streets to get 2 sets of traffic lights changed near me to go within 20 seconds of them being pressed. So they always would change. And living streets are now, just so people know, are doing a whole campaign about the right to cross, because we also know at night, especially for women or young people, it's not safe to be stuck, waiting for lights to change. And then the third one is, and I wish I could share photos, in Holland they have a post with the button for the traffic light on it at the white line where you are cycling through, whereas here you have to go beyond the white line, so it's illegal to get to the push buttony thing on the traffic light. So there's 3 nice topics.
Yep, no, and they all sort of link in quite nicely. So yeah, the first one with the regards to signage for cycling, I have banged my head against a brick wall for quite some time with this one. And in fact, the recent IHE traffic signs conference was going to be like, how do we convey message? I didn't get to go to it in the end. I was too busy with work, sadly. But I did speak with Sally Gibbons at the DFT, and I did sort of say I was quite keen to try and talk to her about maybe how we could improve signs for cycling. She raised her eyebrows with a sort of, yes, I see where you're coming from, but I think the DFT's position is they're so short staffed that they don't want to take on additional work that they can avoid at the moment. So I don't know whether this is something that, again, this may be where campaign groups come in, and maybe some people maybe doing a bit of pro bono work, perhaps even just trying to get them on site, because the DFT does move very slowly. They react to events rather than proactively prepare, so a lot of the infrastructure things that we can do now are reactive panics to a changing dynamic. In 1982, for example, with floor cycle lanes just painted on the road were the big in thing, and then they weren't sufficient, but it took another 15-20 years for someone to come around and say, well, now you can put a wand down, and you can put light segregation down, so things do move very slowly. With regards to the traffic signals, this is purely traffic signal engineers who still work to saturation flow theory and 1970s principles that the car gets the priority. There is nothing in the rule book that says you cannot have a traffic signal that goes straight to red when a pedestrian pushes the button. There are a couple of pelican crossings in Blackburn. When I was out filming about traffic signals for my YouTube channel, I actually went out there and I pressed the button, and to my absolute delight, I pressed the button, it went to amber, then red instantly. So that does exist. It's just the signals engineer has decided to not have that provision. And that's basically just multi-centric thinking that we need to sort of push out the door and usher in a new way of thinking. And I think what's the old saying for science, isn't it, that science progresses like one retirement at a time. And I think unfortunately traffic engineering, sorry, one of my colleagues is just leaving there, I'm in the office here. One of the other science progresses one retirement at a time, and I think unfortunately traffic engineering progresses one retirement at a time as well. So as new people come in, I think a lot of this old school thinking of delay for pedestrians to keep traffic moving will go away, which again takes you back to your third question. The reason why we don't put push buttons in a sensible place is purely, again, design manuals have always said that the push button is associated with the primary signal pole for traffic. So I think, yes, there should be a second pole, or better, there should be a detector loop that is maintained and picks you up, so you don't have to stop and balance and try and push a button to then set off again. I mean, from experience on an e-bike, if you like stop and then accidentally touch the pedal a little bit while you're trying to press the button, you launch forwards, because I've done that a few times because I'm a terrible e-bike rider. I'm still getting to grips with that. But yeah, again, I think that's something that you could argue that could be done. There's nothing to stop you from putting an extra push button in, or a push button that's not attached to that primary signal, but it's just that old design thinking that just hasn't gone away. And I think if people can prove the benefits of doing something, people might start doing it. So again, it's that we need campaigners to really carry on putting the pressure on, the sort of dinosaur thinking. Basically, you campaigners are the asteroid that will wipe out the dinosaurs. So with a bit of luck, that's where we'll be.
Very quickly though, so that could be an Equality Act thing though, couldn't it? Because,
Yes.
wheelchair users, all sorts of people, because it's for walking, not just for cycling.
Yes, absolutely. And the way a lot of pedestrian crossings are laid out, I would be amazed if they comply with the requirements of the Equalities Act. They might comply with the requirements of traffic management acts and so on and so forth, but I'm not convinced the way some push buttons are situated, the fact that some junctions don't have anything other than the tactile cone on the push button, there's no audible noise. I'd be amazed if a lot of these meet the requirements of a reasonable adjustment. So that potentially, yeah. I mean, I personally think tactile paving itself, I think, falls short of what it should be doing, and all the different types of paving blocks, and especially some of the blister tactiles, which are quite uncomfortable to walk on. My nan used to really struggle with those, and she had difficulty with her sight, but she hated walking across tactile pavings because you can lose your footing and you can take your ankle on some of them. They're not the most accommodating of surfaces.
Thank you very much.
There's a lot to do with that, I think.
Yeah, thanks. All good questions. I'm going to bring Claire in, and I'm also going to hand over to Claire because I might have to duck out shortly. Claire, do you want to come in with your questions? Take the reins.
Yeah, and if you have to go, Sally, thanks for everything this year. Yeah, Bryn, brilliant chat, and actually that was a great question too, Ruth. Really interesting answers there. Mine was going back to the point earlier around parking and introducing kind of restrictions, and how councillors will say we can't install restrictions on parking like ANPR if it's based on us generating a revenue, because that's against the law. Do you have any kind of answer to that? I think it's a kind of one of those where they've added 2 and 2 and made 27, but
yeah, there is a stipulation in the Traffic Management Act that revenue raised as a result of civil parking enforcement or whatever should only be used to finance the enforcement regime and minor improvements to signs and lines related to that. So you can't put in a parking area and then think, oh great, that's going to raise £500,000 a year, we can build a new school. It's got to be almost like ring fence. Now I think because of the mentality of a lot of these sort of like pro-driving bad faith actors that are, it's just revenue raising. Well, of course, everything's revenue raising. We live in a capitalist society. If it doesn't make money, it doesn't happen. So it's such a nonsense argument. But yeah, I think there's a fear from local authorities that it's the bad publicity. They know they've got the powers to do this. They can enforce parking. The CCTV vehicles that drive past are usually the preferred option because they have to be able to take a photograph or a video. So, but as you said, bus lane cameras are, the ANPR attached to a CCTV camera. It records a violation and then it collects the number plate. So the powers again exist. I think it's just that fear of doing things. And again, I think I don't like the world being a giant shouting match, but the way this sort of active travel brick wall that we're facing is, until campaigners and industry insiders are louder than the shouty crackers minority that hate cycling.
I'm just going to have to go and get my power cable. I'm going to run out of battery. Mark, do you want to come in?
Yep, no worries.
Hi, Bryn. Can't get the video working. Just wanted two things. First of all, your point about ring fencing the funding, it can be used on environmental improvements. Actually, if you read through the regulations, it says, Section 55 says you can use it on reducing air pollution. So you could, if you were very creative as a council, do all sorts of things with reducing air pollution. You have to prove that you don't want multi-storey car parks first. But I wanted to ask about something completely different, which was the difference between the signing legality and the risk assessment of things like light segregation poles or light separation poles, and not putting them on the lines, because that's my understanding is that's the DFT's line, Sally's line was that's not a sign, so it's up to a council to decide whatever they put in the road, but it's their risk if they get something wrong. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I've never really seen eye to eye with this argument from the DFT that the light segregation needs to go behind the white line. For me, the white line is the absolute edge of the carriage. So that's for me, the white line behaves as a curb. So yes, I know we tend to provide a 450mm buffer for wing mirrors and things like that, but that's only a sort of like gentleman's agreement in terms of design. There's nothing that says I can't put something right up to the edge of a curb. I mean, for example, one thing that we do put on corners, for example, are the big bell bollards. They don't tend to have much of a setback because they are there to stop you from driving across the footpath. So I personally think that you should be able to put the ones on the line, and I'm sure I've seen a couple of places that have done that. Again, because there's never really been any proactive guidance on this front. I mean, let's be honest. Even LTM 120 is a highly reactive document. It's kind of picked up what people are already doing and codified it, rather than going out there and saying, "Here's a list of new things you can do." So, I personally, I would put my own neck on the block and happily put segregation ones on the white line, or I would probably take a bit more of the traffic lane and provide two white lines and put the ones in the middle of the two white lines. So then you've got a full width cycle track and a full width traffic lane. And by full width, they obviously mean, you know, potentially in a 30 mile an hour, you only need 3 meters, 3.2 meters or whatever. But if the cyclists are away from that traffic, you can go to the narrower widths. I've got a scheme in London, I can't divulge where it is, but I've got a scheme in London where we're looking at changing the road layout, and because it's not a public highway as such, which probably helps people in London work out where it is if they know that part of the world quite well, it's going to be a case of I will be putting the ones on the white line on that scheme, because it's a private network and it's not going to have somebody waving the CSIGD at me saying, "Oh, you can't do that."
Oh, you're such a teaser. This has been brilliant, and I think we might need to have you as a regular feature, Bryn. I am going to ask, maybe if there are any more points, people can put them in the chat, and I'm just going to ask Ranty to come in now, and we'll finish off. Dave, I'm going to move on now, so if you put your question in the chat, I'm sure Bryn will pick it up there.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Can you all see the screen? I hope you can now.
Thanks, Mark.
Right. Good. Thank you very much. So I'll go on as long as my voice will allow me. Decided to get ill again, which is all good fun. So I thought I would round off the term with a site visit to my favourite project of 2022, which takes us to the UK's Motor City in Coventry. And this is the Coundon Cycleway, and 2.5 kilometres, which runs, well, I'll say why it doesn't quite run to the ring road, out in the northwest of the city, goes through shopping areas, past schools, playing fields. It's lots and lots of customers either side of it. So it's just where you want to provide a decent spine cycle route. And interesting is you'll see through the photos from probably about here at the city end, maybe to, I don't know, 2/3 of the way up, it's about a 30-metre climb. So a little surprise on the way of how to cope with that. So let's have a blast through 30 odd photos, but I won't be spending hours and hours on it. So let's see what we can find. So I'm starting at the city end, and this is where it starts. Unfortunately, it's not at the ring road. There's a bit of a gap between the ring road, which is crossed by a really big bridge, takes you right into the heart of the city. So the glaring gap at the moment apparently is because local politicians are wrangling over exactly how to finish the scheme at the bottom. There's a wider project being planned. I don't know the details. So yeah, you've got to kind of put up with it for a bit to get past that. However, once you get past the unpleasantness to start with, on Coundon Road itself, we get to Chester Street, which has some very interesting lumps of concrete both sides of the junction. And they are the Aggregate Industries, or Charcon is the local brand, Dutch entrance curbs, which we've effectively just stolen from the Dutch. Not sophisticated in the amount you can get, different types and layouts, but it does the job that we need. So this is good news. You can see the form of the cycle track going off into the distance, which we'll look at in a second. I'll talk about the junctions and some of the choices on a different one. So from this point onwards at Chester Street, all nicely protected for a couple of kilometres up what is a steep hill in places. Little view from the side road. So drivers are taken up, they've got engines, they can get over very, very easily. Walking, cycling, completely nice and level across the junctions. Just what we want to see. And then the route carries on. All very straightforward, all very simple, does a really good job. Another side road treatment, and you'll see lots of these as we go through. So probably a better view of this one because you show kind of what's happening ahead. So I'm going from this separate two-way cycle track, kind of becomes, I guess, a shared area across the junction, and then you drop back down into the cycle track in the distance. Personally, I might have done this slightly differently. You kind of lose the separation between walking and cycling, which is probably okay for people walking and cycling themselves, but just thinking of visually impaired users, maybe need a bit of guidance through there. But it's not for me really to go into the detail of that. Designer would have come up with a reason, consultation would have come out with various views. So I will save that criticism for my own schemes that I'm working on at the moment. Really, really interesting detail here. There's actually a level crossing, very old bridge, which we will see in a second. Oh, let's have a close up of the curves.
Ooh.
Yes, ooh. So there's your ramp curves. These are the corner units to take you from ramp to ordinary curbs down the side there. And yeah, it's all very nice, all very crisp and massively, massively heavy. Something like 150 odd, 180 odd kilos each. So they're not going anywhere for the maintenance people.
No
so
giveaway line, Bryn.
No, there's no giveaway lines, and we might cover that in a second. So as we carry on up the hill, yeah, so level crossing up here, so drivers have to go over that. Pretty much at grade for walking and cycling under this little bridge here. Just really an opportunist design feature. I mean, it wasn't built for this, but it's been used for this. And there you go. Bit of a dip under, but it's kind of is what it is. All very nice. Not sure about the cobbles they've left within the old structure, historic cobbles there. It's a bit uneven, to be honest, but that can be rectified. Pop out the other side, and this is looking really, really good now. So we've got a nice planted buffer, see a floating bus stop as we come up the road there. And what you will see is there's car parking absolutely everywhere. This is the Motor City, and for them to be able to hew out this cycle route from all the parking and the space on this particular route is quite an achievement, and you'll see some of that further up. And that's guided, I guess, the reason for going for a two-way cycle track. Yes, you can maintain a lot more car parking within the space you've got, and also in terms of actually building something less curbs laid, if that makes sense. It's a bit more efficient on the space. You will see every so often little cutouts of the protection there. That allows people to cycle in and out from side roads opposite. So a little view back at the underpass there, and we're on Barker's Butts Lane now, a little bit further up north. Big zoom in here. So they're the tactile paving. It's a mini zebra crossing, so they should actually be red and L-shaped. That's a mistake for some reason, but the actual system they've used is quite interesting. So it's not concrete slabs. It's like a, I guess, a fiberglass netting that's attached to the footway surface, and then it's overlaid with this clever paint system. And so that's how they create the blisters. Interesting to see how that lasts. I know other parts of the country have been using it, lots of good feedback on it. If somebody does drive over it, it's not going to break. So maybe from a maintenance point of view, a nice little feature here. And we keep going. Yes, illegal parking here and there, but so what? It's the way people are, unfortunately. But the cycle track here slips in behind all the car parking. We can keep going up the hill. We've got the cycle track running past shops so people can do their shopping, which is exactly how it should be. Another little cutout just to show connectivity into the estates further on. Yeah, you can debate whether that's easy to cross or not, but it gives you the opportunity. We then get up to first set of signals within the scheme. There are only 2 sets of signals, no, 3 sets of signals to play with. This is a crossroads, cycle traffic kind of built in within the staging here. Depends on how you catch it. You can wait for a bit of time here, which is always a compromise with sort of trying to maintain current traffic to a certain extent, but you're taken through safely under your own green. So it's all very comfortable. And we keep going. Another floating bus stop, which is kind of okay on the tactiles. Not really L-shaped on the island here. Probably a floating one is a bit tight. Maybe they should have got rid of a bit more of the parking on the other side. But okay, they're trying things out here. Pakescroft, interesting. That was, if we go to Pakescroft in the side road, that was a crossroads. So Pakescroft itself has been filtered now. So a bit of a low traffic neighbourhood plugging into the cycle route, which is fantastic. This connects up to a park, so it's just a place that you really want this protection. So again, another little route through to the estate beyond. Then the scheme swings over to the other side of the road. For all good reasons, we'll see further on. May have been nice to have a ped crossing at the same time, because if you're going to stop traffic for cycles, stop it for pedestrians. But in terms of detection, this is spot on. As you get, so I mean, I was literally getting up to the stop line here, and that's the signal going red for drivers. So just what we want to do. So there you go, swinging across the road, and we're going up the hill. Now you can see this is getting really steep as we go. Another cutout on the left-hand side there to the side road opposite, but the same kind of design approach all the way up the hill here. You can go and look at the befores. There's bits and pieces appearing in Google now, and perhaps give it 6 months and you'll be able to explore the route yourself. There's a roundabout, probably we're getting halfway up the scheme now. So this particular one with parallel crossing taking us across further up the hill. This is at Scott's Lane. All very sensible, same tactile paving system there, which is done correctly in this particular case. Seems to work all right. I think probably with parallel zebras, we've still got this bit of an issue that drivers don't really understand them. They don't really realise or feel the need to stop for cycle traffic. But that's another story for another day. A few shots at bus stop just north of Scott's Lane as we get onto West Hill Road. Pretty busy bus stop because this is a shopping area. All seems to work pretty well. So it's accessible, people can get on and off the bus. What's quite nice is it links directly into another set of signals here. There's a pedestrian crossing over the main road. And this is how safe it is. Kids out on the scooters who could never have done this before. They would have been on the footway annoying everybody. So there they are, own space, nice and safe. And you can see how steep the hill's getting here. It's getting very steep here, and obviously Range Rovers need to go off-road sometimes, but they're not in the way, so that's fine. So West Hill Road is a bit of a hill, and as we get up we find the cycle hire station. And the purple one there with the purple flash is an e-bike, which is what I was using on the day to go up this pretty steep hill. A lot easier going downhill there, obviously. And here we are. Private access, this is to one of the schools on the route. But again, we've kept the same curb treatments, so we keep this walking and cycling route level across the side roads. Really nice, because I was there when it was a bit warmer than today, under the trees, got some shade there. It's, you know, it's a really, really good scheme. And as we get towards the top, it flattens out at Hollyfast Road. School playing field to the right-hand side here. Lots of football at the weekends. So this is a really useful piece of infrastructure for commuting trips, trips for sports activities. There's a church along there, there's the shops. It really is a utility route for everyday use. This is looking back down the hill, so yeah, you can see the land falling away, and as you get around that corner you can see the cathedral in Coventry. Another nice little touch is the hedgerow that's been planted in there, which gives you a bit of a buffer. One of the disadvantages of having two-way cycle tracks is if you live on the other side of the road, you don't always find lots of opportunities to access. So maybe I would want to have little gaps every so often to allow that. Even with flow cycle tracks, you need formal crossings every so often so people can U-turn and go back in the direction they want. What you will see at this end of the job is between the footway and the cycle track is some very nice 30-degree chamfer curbs, which you can bounce up and down on your bike all day long without coming off. So we've got the Dutch entrance curbs at the junctions and the forgiving curbs next to the cycleway. So we've got two of the really, really important curb developments for this year, or the last couple of years really. And there's a close-up, pity my knees. Nearly at the top now. So this is just another parallel zebra, which just connects into the route itself that goes, so the route goes off to the right into Norman Place Road, and this crossing just allows people to take a different direction. You know, you could extend that route in the future for cycling. And then into Norman Place Road, again, you can look at it yourself on the map. Another entrance to a school, another entry treatment. So there's one across the school entrance there and one across the side road. So yeah, really, really useful, really, really accessible. Really opening up the whole of this area for cycling. And then it's a Merry Christmas from me.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. One question in the chat was, how long was that whole route?
2.5 kilometres.
Wow, yeah, really, really great. And thank you for that. I think, does anyone have any sort of really urgent questions? Otherwise, I think we'll give that a big round of applause. Sorry, who's on? Whoever put this on, let's see. Ah, that was Mark. Sorry, I was just muting. Yeah, big round of applause for Mark, big round of applause for Bryn, and thanks everyone for coming this year if you have been before. Just a couple of things to mention in terms of kind of next year. So this was the last one for the year. I'm just going to post a link in the chat. We have actually got our new website is now live in the background, so you can go there, and if you want to sign up, if you're not on the mailing list already, you can go there to sign up. It is a work in progress, so it's not the finished article and will continue to be so, but there is now the sign up form is on that site, so if you're not on our mailing list, please go there. We will resume on Tuesday the 10th of January. And the link will be emailed to people who are on the mailing list. So if you're not on the mailing list, get on it. I wanted to say thanks to everyone who's helped out behind the scenes this year. So Sally, Bob, Ruth, Steve Connor, who I don't think is here this week, but also to some of the people who are in kind of the audience who've also helped. So Frank and Elizabeth, who stepped forward to help publish the video. Thank you to them. They are the people who are making the recordings appear on our YouTube channel, and also to all the people who've emailed in ideas. A high proportion of our speakers and the things that we do here come like directly from you, so do continue, you know, to email those through. You know, we see ourselves as the people that just keep the space for all of the people who enjoy coming here, so feel free to suggest ideas into the email that I've just posted there. And lastly, if there is anyone who fancies helping out with that website, it would be like really minor pieces of work, just keeping updated. Very simple tool, don't need to be a techie, then do please get in touch. I'm talking to one of you later tonight or tomorrow about making sure that we send out a regular email reminder to help people just keep this date in your calendar. So that's just an example of like all the little things that we can share around, then it makes everything work really smoothly. So that's all from us, and thanks to everyone, and have a good Christmas and see you in the new year. Cheers, Tim.